Hey everybody, Quantum here, and in this video I want to go ahead and break down the top 3 deck lists from the North American Championships that occurred in January 2025 for Disney Lorcana. The lists are all very unique. We have a Ruby Amethyst taking first place, obviously, in Ed's list, Scott's list taking second in Ruby Sapphire, and Zan's list taking third with Emerald Steel. In a separate video, I do want to compare Zach and Patrick's Amethyst Steel lists, and we'll take a look at those a little bit more in detail in that second video. But with store set championships coming up and Ed's list basically being a literal definition of a meta breaker to a certain extent, and again, we can discuss this in detail here. I do want to review this and give you my take on it at least. So maybe, even in the comment section, we can have some discussion around, you know, did Ed mean to do this or not? And, Ed, if you ever watch this or anybody else, my email is in the YouTube channel and I'd be happy to set up a call. Just a quick caveat before I get started though, I just realized that my phone wasn't set up to show both my inboxes. So if you were emailing me on that email and I didn't respond, my apologies. That's the reason why. Anyways, jumping in straight to the deck lists here. When you look at Ed's Ruby Amethyst list, a lot of people, you probably already heard, have been talking about, well, his deck is heavily tech to beat Ruby Sapphire, which, again, if you've been playing the game, you've seen what's been popular online, etc. You know that Ruby Sapphire, it probably is the strongest deck of the format, but it's definitely the most popular deck. And the European Championship, as well as the North American Championship, I think proved that. So when you look at Ed's Ruby Amethyst list, there are three notable things that immediately jump out at you. One is we don't see Elsa the Fifth Spirit at all. This is a card that ever since it came out in Shimmering Skies has been seen as a staple in Ruby Amethyst. It's a control card. It gives you that forced interaction that Ruby Amethyst wants to have. It slows down the aggro decks, which is what Ruby Amethyst has traditionally had some struggles with in the past, and it just gives you that additional point of meaningful interaction that is also inkable, which is like the best of all worlds, right? In set 2 we played Pinocchio to force a tap down. That was a 2-cost uninkable 1/1. It was really not that great, but to force that interaction we needed to do that sometimes. And Elsa the Fifth Spirit not only has evasive, it's inkable, it has good willpower, it survives into steel decks. It has all of the positive things that you want for a card for Ruby Amethyst. The strength is a little underwhelming, but it's decent enough given how good the rest of the card is. There's a reason why it's so expensive. So why did Ed cut this from the list? I'll give you my take, and again, it may be correct or incorrect. The other thing that you'll notice about Ed's list here is there is no Maui Hero to All. Another card that has been a staple 3-4 of in Ruby Amethyst. It's been reduced to 2 sometimes, but never really cut altogether too much, because it is such a powerful card. It's a free 2-for-1 usually. It's a walking 2-for-1. Why are there no Maui Hero to Alls in here? It's been a staple since since set 1, since the first chapter. The card came out in set 1, and it's been in Ruby Amethyst ever since. So no Maui Hero to All, a card that seemed uncuttable just because it seemed to just get so much value. Why was this not played in his list at all? Really interesting. And then the third thing I think that I would say is the most interesting, and again, this is something that we talked about a little bit on the channel before in the last meta report, is the newest introduction to Ruby Amethyst, which everybody was, saying like, yeah, this is the card and blah, 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 is Genie Wish Fulfilled. I don't know why I keep clicking off the card section. I should really just stay here, right? But the Genie Wish Fulfilled. This card has been spiking up in price. Everybody who plays Amethyst needs their playset of Genies. You play 3 to 4 usually now, and it's pretty much a mainstay in every Amethyst deck, let alone Ruby Amethyst. Why would we cut Genie from the list? And when you take a look at those 3 cards, the Elsa, the Maui, and the Genie, you have to think about, well, why would he cut those and what would he replace them with, right? And then, of course, the big question that we keep saying is, why? Why would you do this? Yes, Ed's list was teched heavily for Ruby Sapphire, it being the most popular deck, but what about his other matchups? Is he just going to accept losses into Amber Steel aggro now that he doesn't have like the Elsa to force the interaction, the Maui to, get some positive trades out on the board? And again, we can discuss maybe some thought process behind there. So when you look at maybe what Ed could have replaced these cards with, the first thing is, well, he's expanded his 1-drop pool. All of these 1-drops, you can look, I don't know what a term for them is. I don't want to call them like power 9 or anything, because obviously that's not what they are, but they're basically the power 1-drops, right? All of these Amethyst 1-drops, like, it's amazing that Amethyst has this level of like card pool that's literally a cut above everyone else, every other color I should say in the game. All of their one drops are cards that replace themselves. So right away, that's tremendous value. The issue with these one drops is they all lose to Cindy Storm. Again, that's an interaction that we've talked about many, many times. Cinderella on one, singing Let the Storm Rage on turn two to out your one drop or your two drop in the Flynn Rider. It's a very powerful interaction that can slow you down immensely. However, your opponent isn't going to have that every single game, right? I mean, sometimes they may. Out of 3 games, they might start all 3 games that way, but you're going to be on the play for at least one of those games, if not two, and you can still play around it to a certain extent. That's a calculated risk I think that Ed was willing to take here, given that he knows how much synergy and how much power he can generate off of a strong opening turn into the rest of the meta. Because making sure you hit your one drop is very important in Ruby Amethyst. This was a really big talking point when you look at how the deck was positioned in set 2 when it was essentially tier 0. 80% of top cuts were Ruby Amethyst, right? If you missed your one drop, you missed your two drop usually, because half of your two drops in the 8 that you play are dependent upon having a one drop. If you don't have a one drop, guess what? If you have a snake in your hand, you can't play it, right? You need the Flynn Rider, and then you're just developing a Flynn Rider, which is, not the worst, but without a one drop to continue to redraw and hopefully get into your answers, it's a little bit of a slower package. So by maximizing these one drops here, it enables him to have a very likely, statistically, way to curve out into turn 2, being the Man of Snake, bouncing back the one drop, and either again going back to set 2 stuff, using the one drop as the ink, or just keeping it in hand for redraw later on. The Flynn Rider developing onto, again, in certain matchups is also strong, depending on the player or the draw, and again, the kind of matchups. But this is a card that really puts the pressure on your opponent. And while I've said before, like a card like this is very susceptible to like the steel decks, Babooms, Fire the Cannons, Let the Storm Rage on, etc., it still forces the interaction. It still forces your opponent to A, have the card, and B, use that interaction during that turn. And it might be enough to just slow them down a turn too, even though you lose tempo because you lose your character, but it could slow them down enough where you're able to claw back some of that tempo and that advantage. It forces your opponent to make awkward plays. For example, when you play this against red-blue, especially when you're on the play, if they go turn 2 Tipo, you're proccing 3 lore. If they're on the play and you're on the draw and you develop the Flynn Rider, and you saw this happen in the finals, you'll see that the Ruby Sapphire player has to do something like turn 4 Brawl, or sorry, turn 3 Brawl because they ramped on turn 2, turn 3 Brawl with the 4 Ink, or turn 3 Grammatala instead of Hiram on turn 3 with the ramp, because they're forced to contest the Flynn Rider, right? They don't want to put a 1/6 Hiram on board and proc you 3 lore, because I mean, honestly, developing a Hiram in Ruby Sapphire is a tough thing to stick, given that Ruby Amethyst will A, outgrind you in the draw game, and B, they have the direct answers, just like you do with Ruby cards, in answering that Hiram in the brawls. So the Flynn Rider is still a decent option in a lot of matchups, and can help you get that head start that you need, because a lot of people view this game as like, yeah, the lore early doesn't really matter too much. It matters more at the end, and so a card like this is lower impact. You still need 20 lore total. Whether it's the 3 lore you get at the beginning of the game or the 3 lore that you get at the end of the game, you still need the lore regardless. So you treat this the same as, I need to be aggressive in the early game, just like I need to be aggressive in the end game in order to close something out. So you have an expanded 1-drop package. It helps you better curve out onto, you look at the 3-drop package here, and you see the reintroduction of Crab. I've talked about Crab having tremendous value. I personally would play like 3 to 4 myself, just because you get so much value here. The thing that you get off Crab in this deck, especially with the Diablo, is a lot of positive tempo gain. Because if you are able to drop that surprise Crab with a Diablo, even with a Magic Broom, even if you don't get the redraw on the Broom, but you're able to take out a character with a very low cost character of your own, it's tremendous value if you get it on the Diablo. It takes out an opponent's threat, you get a redraw off the Diablo, and you still develop a 3-cost 3/3 body that is a singer for friends, specifically in Amethyst decks. Well, Ruby Amethyst, because Emerald Amethyst doesn't really play friends, right? But it's a really powerful interaction here. Again, it's a very specific line, so the odds that you have this is fairly low. You'd probably rather fish for the Flynn Sisu, which is why you see this being a 4 and 4 of rather than this being a 4 of. But it's still a great addition in the 3-drop slot. And when you look at the way that their deck kind of curves out, there's no Medusa here. I would say that Crab is maybe controversial, but I would say that Crab probably provides you a little bit more utility than Medusa. Um, Crab also helps give your existing characters that punch that they need to get over the higher willpower characters. And that kind of fulfills the role of what Maui did as well, right? And then, like I said, whether your character gets traded out or not, you still have a Merlin Crab on board. So the Merlin Crab will likely be able to contest, and when it's banished, it also gives +3 to something else. So in that sense, I don't want to say it's a Maui because it's not, right? Maui comes in with Rush and is able to immediately surprise take down something. But you likely, as a Ruby Amethyst player, have an established board at all times, some kind of established board, because you're the one dictating tempo usually with, be preparing and resetting tempos, etc. So at some point, throughout the game, you should have an established character. And so Crab coming in kind of does act as that surprise factor. Make my 0-1 Diablo a 3-1 now. Now it trades positively and gets me card draw. And I still end on the body that can challenge and possibly go plus as well. So in that sense, it 2-for-1 just like a Maui does. I know that's a weird concept, and maybe you don't agree with that, but to me, that's how I can justify saying, like, I don't play Maui, because I think the Crab interaction is just as good in a meta where I would rather value getting the challenge in earlier, because this is 3, not 5 like Maui. And, one of the reasons why Maui could be cut is because, when your opponent has 3 or 4 characters on board and they're questing for 6 to 8, I've said this before, Maui coming in and taking out one of those threats isn't high impact enough. Dealing with the board as you go with something lower to the ground like Crab, enabling your lower cost characters like Snake, like Flynn, even when it's lost its value, making it a 5-2 challenger, like your 1-drops, allows you to trade more efficiently into those aggro decks. So it gives you some counterplay against aggro, which is why, again, Crab is a pretty good addition here. Still staying on the Flynn Sisu line to punish the red-blue decks, which is fine. 4 Goat and 4 Rabbit. So why do we go with the 4 Rabbit over Genie? And I'm going to approach this from a Yu-Gi-Oh player's mindset, because in Yu-Gi-Oh, at least traditionally, card advantage is king. For those of you that play that game, like Master Duel, for example, how a card like Max C is literally a game-winning card. Like, you get your Max C off, your opponent has to pass on nothing, because they can't risk playing into a Max C, because they give you 2-3 cards, and that's just enough for you to win the game the next turn, right? Card draw and the grind game is what Ruby Amethyst excels at, and you saw it in the finals. You even saw it against Zan, which, that matchup can be reanalyzed, because I did do a commentary on it, but there was a point in Game 3 for the only match that we had streamed where Ed was like, I'm playing into your Diablo. I'm playing my rabbits. I'm bouncing my rabbits. I'm getting my card draw. And yes, you're drawing off your Diablo because of it. And that got Zan back into the game. But Ed knew, he said, I know your deck. You're very low to the ground. You cap out at 4 cost cards, more or less. I have the higher impact cards. You won't be able to answer my board that I've established here without developing, the necessary threats, which is a turn too late at this point, because I've regained tempo even though I went second. You have to develop your Ursula Deceiver. It has to sit on board and survive. I will out it. I don't care how many cards I give you. I need to play my game. This is what my deck excels at. That's how I imagine his thought process went. I could be wrong, though, but that's how I imagine it went, and it worked out for him. I mean, it almost backfired. Zan almost got back into the game, but in the end, I think Ed was confident in his game plan, and it worked out. But a card like Rabbit, you saw how devastating it was in the Ruby Sapphire match. Like, Ed, in those matches, there were times where he had 10 plus cards in hand at all times. He had 10 plus cards in his hand. What does that mean for you as a control player? It means whatever you as my opponent plays, I will have the answer for it. I need to be prepared. I've got it. I need to drop big Sisu. I've got it. I need to brawl. I've got it. I need to challenge. I've got it. I need to boost my characters. I've got it. I need to develop a wider board to, replace itself when you be prepared. I've got it. I've got every answer to whatever it is you are doing. And that is the mindset of card advantage. Card advantage is, I'm putting myself in an advantageous position so that I can answer whatever it is that you do. It's not an easy thing to execute, right? Like, this is a slow card still, and this is why Genie was favored instead of Rabbit at the beginning. Genie is fast. Genie comes in, it replaces itself. Great. Genie's still a good card. It's a 2/4 body. It survives some of the steel interactions, which is great. I mean, Zeus is still an excellent out to the Genie, but Genie comes in and it's a fast card. It's going to quest for 2. It has evasive. It's protected. It's hard to out. It's hard to interact with. Merlin Rabbit is slow, but it does replace itself on the bounce. It does replace itself when it leaves play. When you play a Genie, you're kind of worried. You're kind of like, I hope this Genie sticks. I just invested 4 ink on it, and I need this to stick because I need to start questing. With a Rabbit, you know, if you've played Ruby Amethyst, your board gets cleared, your opponent does some shenanigans, they've tapped out. If you follow up with a Rabbit, or you be prepared and you follow up with a Rabbit, you feel good. You're just like, yep, Rabbit replaced itself, can quest for 1, can bounce it. If you out it, I draw again. Sure, I probably have another one in my hand anyways. And that's exactly what you saw Ed do in like the Ruby Sapphire matches. There were times where his opponent, and I commented on this, I said, Ed is counting his Hieroms. Ed is counting the Ruby Sapphire players' Hieroms. He says, I've brawled 1, you've inked 1, I've just, be prepared another one, whatever it might be. You've got 1 left. I'm running you out of options. But me, I have Rabbits, I have libraries, I have 12 1-drops that replace themselves, I have friends on the other side, I have a lot of card draw. His opponent was counting his Ed's Rabbits, right? Scott was saying, okay, I'm going to brawl this Rabbit, I'm going to ice block Sisu that Rabbit, I'm going to be prepared and get that Rabbit out of there. And Ed was like, sure, just, another Rabbit after another Rabbit. I'm drawing cards faster than you are because your Hierom draws 2 and then it gets removed. My Rabbit comes in and gets removed, I draw 2. But then I have way more card draw to facilitate the grind game. And that's exactly what you saw. Ed played that matchup textbook to the T as to how you would expect it to be played for him to win. So the Rabbit, representing a slower, more card advantage oriented gameplay, does this put you at a disadvantage into the Amber Steel aggro decks, into the Emerald Amethyst decks. And this is where I think you really have to critically think. And that's why I'm spending so much time on this, because this is a very important topic if you really want to master Amethyst, or just like the general concept of how do I pick and choose my cards, right? And again, I could be wrong. This is just my opinion, but I'm trying to look at this as objectively as possible. And I've talked about this in my menu reviews, match reviews, deck list reviews, meta reviews, etc. Genie comes into play. And let me pull up Genie just so you guys have the visual of it again. Genie comes into play, and against an aggro deck, he's not doing too much. Is he going to be challenging? Well, then what's the point of him having 2 lore? Is he going to be challenging? Well, what's the point of playing a 4-cost character with only 2 strength? Is he going to quest? That's great. That's what he's here to do. He's got evasive. He's protected. I mean, yes, he could challenge other evasives, but, he's got 2 lore. I'm going to be gaining 2 lore. Understanding when I need to quest with Genie versus when I have to challenge with him is important. A lot of people think sometimes I just have to use my Genie to challenge the opposing Genie. Sometimes that's not the answer. But into a board, just like with the case with Maui, into a board where an opponent goes wide, how much value are you really getting out of Genie? If my opponent has like a Lawrence on board, a Smee that's questing, a Daisy Duck, I'm not trying to play Genie. I'm trying to slow them down. What does Genie do for me in that scenario? To be fair, what does Rabbit do in that scenario either? I mean, at least Rabbit will replace itself too, so it gets me 2 cards instead of the 1. But I feel much better using Crab on a Rabbit or bouncing a Rabbit with Fox or Snake in order to develop the cards needed to out the opponent's board than I do bouncing a Genie. That extra card that Rabbit gives you, that card advantage that you're able to build up, like I've said, gives you those cards to have the answers for what your opponent is doing. If I bounce a Genie once or twice and replay it, yeah, I might draw 2 or 3 cards. If I bounce a Rabbit 2 or 3 times, though, and replay it every time, I'm drawing 6 cards. I'm drawing my answers. And that's exactly what Ed, I think, was basing this on. He said, look, at the end of the day, I need the cards that are high impact. I'm not trying to play no Mickey Mouse game, pun intended, around I need this certain scenario or this certain condition for these cards to proc and do this and that and the other. Nah, Ed's like, look, the most effective thing into these aggro decks is Brawl. I need to see my Brawl. If I see Brawl, I'm outing the opposing Genie. I'm not playing this game where I need to have my Elsa and my Genie and I need all these things to go right. No, Brawl is the answer. Plain and simple. Efficient, effective, Brawl. 4 be prepared. everybody was cutting this back to 0, 1, 2. It's come back up to 3 in Ruby Amethyst, more or less. But 4? What about Pete? Don't you just get blown up by Pete? Again, you're not playing Mauis and stuff. How else are you contesting boards? I'm playing the game to control the board as I go. I'm not trying to rely on a be prepared to wipe a board. And yeah, you can't tech for everything. Maybe it is a bad choice into the the Amber Steel aggros and Emerald Amethyst aggros and so on. But Ed clearly had a game plan where he said, I'm confident enough that I can slow you down so that I can get value off this be prepared. Even if you do drop a Pete, I'm going to clean up your board as I go as well. And if you watch the matchup versus Zan, there was a period where Zan, I'm pretty sure his heart just dropped. I think it was when he played, it was either a Diablo or a Deceiver. I think it was a Deceiver. And Ed flipped his hand and revealed the big Sisu. I mean, he may not have flipped his hand. I know he flipped his hand when he had the double rabbits in hand, but whatever. He showed Zan his hand, and Zan saw the big Sisu. And Zan saw that Ed also had the small Sisu on board, knowing that that big Sisu was coming the next turn, because Ed was on 5 ink. And Zan, with a decent board, was just like, I can't do anything. Because he quested with the Prince John, and like, he knew he was going to lose his board, right? And so Ed, again, playing those high impact cards for when they matter. I'm not trying to play, one interaction, this whatever. I'm playing cards that guarantee me interaction. I mean, to be fair, the Sisu doesn't guarantee you interaction, but it's going to at least get you a card or two, most likely. And even if it doesn't, it's still a 3 questing body with 4 willpower. So it's half decent in that regard as well. Because you can play all of these small cards, and that's great. But at the end of the day, you still need to quest. And without genies to put that pressure on board, where are you getting your pressure from? Yeah, you can ping away with these 1-cost characters, and in certain matchups that works, like against Ruby Sapphire. But you can get it off the Flynn procs. You can get it off the small Sisu quests, which is a hard card to out, especially if you get it early. The goats coming in and questing represents 3 lore, right? Because it comes in, gains a lore if it lives, quests, gains a lore. Then if it gets removed, gains another lore. The rabbits have to be answered. And then another interesting thing that I thought a lot about after the weekend, I thought about it on Monday. I'm making this video on Tuesday night. The Lady Tremaine here, I think, and again, I could be wrong, but my analysis of this as a 4 of, and just like everybody else, my brain immediately went to, oh man, this is just like the super hard red-blue counter. And it is. But more important than that, this does 2 other things that's, I think, really being overlooked right now. And again, Ed would know better than anybody, so I'm trying to get in the mind of Ed here, and again, I could be completely wrong. First of all, this is a card that guarantees interaction. A Medusa does nothing into a Pluto, that's a 5/5. It does nothing into a Lawrence. It does nothing into an opposing big Sisu, into a Tamatoa. You need a certain condition for a Medusa to proc. Medusa is still very good. But Tremaine, even if it outs a 1/3 Ursula Deceiver, which, to be fair, it did in Ed's feature match against Zan in Game 3, it at least guarantees interaction. No matter what you have on your board, even if it's a warded character, which is an additional plus, you are outing one of your characters. I'm not playing this game where I'm waiting for a certain condition to be met in order for my card to be effective. All of my cards, more or less, are effective. The second thing, as I just talked about earlier, is this is a 2 questing body. Ruby Amethyst, and I've built in the app probably like 5 different iterations of Ruby Amethyst, trying to figure out how I could not improve on this list, but obviously this is very teched for the national championships. But how could I make a list to cover, more local aggro metas? And every time I make a list, I always come back to the same problem. I'm like, where am I getting my questing power from? Like, yeah, I have some stuff, but it just feels like it's too slow, because in testing, I'm going to get into these grind games and I can control the board, but my opponent is going to be questing in the meantime. And they're going to eventually get ahead of me, and then they're only going to need a few other things to stick in order to close the game out. And that puts me in a precarious position, because I need to have removal after removal after removal in order to deal with their threats, because they're the ones pressuring me even though I have control of the game, because I'm not questing. I am not getting ahead in the lore. I'm letting my opponent quest for 2 or whatever in order to get their card exerted and then out it, and then I have a wide board, and maybe in most scenarios I can still outgrind them and win the game that way. But I need my own pressure cards, and Genie wasn't it. This card represents that value. Guaranteed interaction. I don't need a condition to be met, or the condition is something that's obviously going to be met in you have a character on board, at least. I quest for 2. And as a 3/4 body, I survive a lot of different interactions. So yeah, Tremaine seemed to be a good pick on multiple fronts for those reasons. It's not just I'm teching for the red-blue matchup. I'm also considering Tremaine in the context of the rest of my deck here. That's how I think about it anyways. And then the double Sisu, I was also experimenting with this just because, again, the value of a 3-quester is huge. And, if Ed is compromising some of his deck, if he's cutting back on the Elsas and the Mauis, he's just playing a higher impact card. And you saw the impact of this card in his game 3 with Zan, whose list is very low to the ground, very small characters, right? Zan's list is dependent upon I'm outing your hand before you get the ink needed to shift or play out a big Sisu. I'm emptying your hand because, red blue's everywhere and they're playing 3 to 4 Sisus. Ed's only playing 2. Guess what? In that matchup against Zan did make Ed discard, but Ed was also drawing more cards than red blue would have. And as a result, Ed ended up making the decision to keep his big Sisu in his hand because he had enough cards and he had the small Sisu shift on board. So when Zan played that Ursula Deceiver and Ed flipped over 2 cards in a Brawl and a Sisu, Zan knew he's got the ink in the Brawl and he's going to shift that big Sisu next turn, and I'm going to lose 3 out of my 4 characters on my board and I'm going to be behind. And that's exactly what happened. High impact, guaranteed interaction. The only other thing I'll talk about here, man, I'm going to have to wrap this video up because, I don't know, let me know if you made it this far, if I'm just rambling here, but I'm pretty sure this video is already over 20 minutes, so I may not get to Scott's list. I'm going to have to do a separate analysis on these other decks. The library. Whenever a character is banished while here, you may draw a card. Seems to be the theme of this video at this point. Forced interaction. How do you force interaction with the location? What are you talking about? Chernobog followers. Draw 2. Diablo. Draw 2. Magic Broom. Draw 2. Oh, and by the way, I trigger both of these ones at least whenever I want. And if you force the out on these cards, I at least draw 1. If you force the out on this, I draw 2. If I crash this, I draw 2. I'm drawing cards. I'm having every option available to me to deal with your board. You saw Ed do that. Masterclass of execution. I had 10 plus cards in my hand for a lot of my matches, I'm sure. A lot of my red-blue matches, that's for sure. I had the options needed. So whatever you put up on board, I know I know the metagame, I know my lines, I know if you're going to go for this play, this is what I'm going to need to answer it. And I likely am going to have those cards because I'm drawing. And I'm going to draw some more. Yeah. Not only that, this location also represents something very unique in the fact that it has 8 willpower. It also passively gains, why does this location exist, by the way? This thing is insane, right? I mean, the Queen's Castle was good enough, but now we have this. Inkable, only costs 1 to move there, has 8 willpower, gains you a lore, and has what is arguably one of the most broken abilities on a location. Why weren't we playing for this card in every Amethyst list that could play it? I mean, I understand aggro decks may not want... I mean, even aggro decks play this card to a certain degree, right? I mean, I've experimented with aggro decks with this card because it's a draw engine. And your aggro cards, yeah, go ahead, remove my aggro threats. I'll just draw cards. Deal with the location. Good luck. It has 8 willpower. Good luck spending a turn or two trying to out this thing while I just continue to quest and put pressure on you. And you have to deal with it. And, in my matches when I was commentating over those finals, well, I think who was it? I said something. I was like, this person I think it was RMB's match. Oh, which I haven't posted yet, so maybe you guys haven't seen it, or at least I haven't posted it as of me making this video. But RMB let the library. I don't actually know if it was RMB, but it was somebody let the library live for far too many turns, and like it just grinded out the game and one ed the game. Like, you have to deal with this card, and it's tough when the Ruby Amethyst player is playing interaction to remove your threats and brawls and Tremaines and Sisus when they get there, with Foxes to instantly out characters through the rush, just regular challenging through my natural curve out on, turns 3, 4, 5. It's tough. If you get to a point in the game, and I think this is probably where Ed thought that Ruby Amethyst was a great meta call, which I agree. If I get to turn like 4 and the board state is manageable, I'm almost guaranteed, and like, you're not like at like 16 lore or whatever a high count of lore is where I can't deal with it. Let's say you're at like 8 to 10 lore, but your board has been dealt with. You only have a couple of cards left in hand. We're on turn 4, turn 5. Ed's probably like, I bet you my conversion rate to winning is probably over 90%. Because there is no better deck in the game, in the grind game, in the end game, than Ruby Amethyst. Ruby Sapphire isn't better than it. Sapphire Amethyst isn't better than it. Sapphire Amethyst is a close second, to be fair. Amber Steel Song isn't good at it. And obviously no aggro deck is good at it. Where those other decks can excel is in the early game. Ruby Amethyst wants to play a drawn-out game. And so putting the library on early can help you keep up, can give you the cards that you need, can help you gain even more advantage off of your 1-drops, and forces your opponent to say, yeah, I could be executing my strategy and just not caring too much about what the opponent is doing. And that's what I don't really like too much about Lorcana, but these aggro decks right now. But the issue is, if you do that, you're playing an all or nothing game. Because if the Ruby Amethyst player is able to slow you down and is able to prevent you from getting to that critical mass where you can close the game out, you've been just worrying about your own game plan and you've left their board more or less uncontested. Because, yeah, they're probably outing their own board, just trying to deal with yours. But they will have those 1 to 2 interactions, that library, that, small Sisu that's eventually going to become a big Sisu maybe, etc., that have stuck around on the board despite trying to clean up your board. And then you're going to have nothing left, and they're going to still have something. And that's when they take over the game. All right, so with that being said, that's how I think Ed approached this. And on the surface, I think when you look at it at face value, it's easy to look and say, oh, he's just super teched for the Ruby Sapphire match, which he is to a certain extent. But I think there's a lot more nuance to the way that he built his deck. And I think it's very not giving Ed enough credit on his decision making, on his deck. Obviously his play is like flawless too, like, so that's beside the point. But I think you're really cutting Ed short on giving him his flowers on on his decision making on his deck. And it paid off, and I'm glad it did. A very unique build. No Elsa, no Maui, no Genie. And so that's my take on it. I'm gonna have to wrap it up there, guys. I don't even know if you're still with me. You're probably not. There's probably like only like one other person who's watched this video to the end. But if you did enjoy this video, share it. With your friends. Maybe they'll learn something. If you think it was a bad video, let me know in the comment section below as well. I want to know that, maybe where I could improve. And despite what I said at the beginning, I may be able to edit it out, so it may not make it into the final cut, but I will post or try to post the other analysis a little bit more in detail in future videos. As usual, if you made it this far, thank you again for watching. Quantum is out.